Okay, good morning and welcome to our Erev Shabbat edition of our class. We won't call it a parasha class this week. We'll call it a Shabbat Hazon class, as this is the Shabbat preceding Shabbat, which is on Moshe Shabbat and Sunday. And it's known as Shabbat Hazon, which we'll get into more. This is Erev Shabbat Hazon, and that's the title of the class, Erev Shabbat Hazon. And as we know, and we went into more last year, that Hachamim very purposefully align every year Parashat Devarim prior to Tisha B'Av, with the intent to properly direct us and focus us going into this day of Shabbat, a day that we mourn, but a day that we try to find solution to the mourning by correcting our activities individually and as a nation. And in order to do that, we need direction, we need enlightenment, and we need what Moshe Rabbeinu gives us in this parasha, which is called Tocheha, rebuke. Rebuke is not something that is looked at as a negative. That is the Torah's version of caring. Not ignoring, not minding our own business, but being concerned enough to guide those, which is all of us, who have been led astray and wandered to some extent back on the right path, to rebuke us in our wrongdoings and to focus us back on our objectives of life as Jews and as the nation Am Yisrael. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu gets down to business right away in his 1 month monologue at the end of his life. And it's because of that harsh approach that Hachamim saw fit to make sure that that parasha precedes Tisha B'Av every year on our calendar, year in and year out. But beyond that, and I might say over and above that, is our Haftarah. Our Haftarah, which is from the first chapter of the book of Yeshaya, known as the Haftarah Hazon, Hazon Yeshaya, because that's the way the Haftarah begins. Hazon Yeshaya ben Amos. Hazon means a vision. Ironically, it's not actually, according to most commentators, the first prophecy of Yeshaya Hanabi, although it's in the first chapter, according to most, his first prophecy in Perek Vav in the 6th chapter. We won't get into right now why that, let's say, delay occurred in the prophecies of Yeshaya and his book. But in any case, the first chapter is called, it starts with Hazon Yeshaya, his vision. And that was chosen to be the Haftarah, not only to align with Parashat Devarim, but to be the Haftarah that precedes the day of Tisha B'Av. And that Haftarah has so much impact and influence and resonates so much in the collective minds of Am Yisrael that because of it, we named the day of Shabbat, we nicknamed it, which precedes Tisha B'Av, Shabbat Hazon. It's not only because we read that Haftarah, it's because of the nature of that Haftarah. The nature of this Haftarah is, let's call it Moshe Rabbeinu Devarim squared. In modern day terminology, they might say on steroids, but that sounds disrespectful. So we'll call it squared. We'll call it exponential Tocheha rebuke. Because if you thought Moshe Rabbeinu was harsh, and his rebuke was to some extent not completely direct, and there's a lot of hintings in the terminology which he uses, this spares nothing. He holds back zero. He pulls no punches. Yeshaya Hanabi and this prophecy takes it right to Am Yisrael. No mercy, holds nothing back, is afraid of not his career, his reputation, and proceeds to fulfill the will of God by putting the people in their place. And therefore, it's appropriate for Shabbat as we need to be put in our place as a nation prior to this solemn, sad day, but a constructive day, and a day that we can use and will use as being the powerful potential day to impact and reverse our fate to be one not of tragedy commemoration, but of great redemption celebration. Hazon Yeshaya, this haftarah, this prophecy of Yeshaya Nabi, helps us along in that direction. So let's look at the haftarah, let's look at the message of the Nabi, and let's look at some poignant points that really are directed at Am Yisrael, not only at that time. We know that prophets, the Hachamim tell us, prophesies for their time and for the far distant future, so that Yeshaya can be said as speaking to every generation, including and maybe almost especially our generation. And so let's give a little overview of Yeshaya and focus in, hone in on some of his critical points. Well, the first, let's say, 10, 11 Pesukim are general, but extremely harsh, very straightforward. And again, Yeshaya is not shy in this presentation whatsoever. I'd like to start reflecting from Pesukim Yud Aleph 11 and on in this haftarah. So again, if you're in Yeshaya, you're in chapter 1, Pasuk Yud Aleph. And if you're in a Chumash, you can find the haftarah following Parashat Devarim or at the end of the Chumashim. I'm going to skip, pick and choose, and probably and possibly even go out of order, just to give you a flavor of the general message and then some specific points. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, let's try, as we're reading these terminologies and analyzing them, to understand who he's addressing. As Yeshaya says, Lama liroz ivchachem yomar Adonai. Do I need, or why do I need, your abundance of sacrifices? Meaning, Bet HaMikdash, addressing their service in the Bet HaMikdash. Savati olot elim b'cheleb mereim. I'm satiated. In fact, I'm sickened from devouring, so to speak, all your fatty animals, your wonderful, choice, expensive korbanot. He says, Lo hafashti, I don't want them. You come to see my presence, to greet me on the Shalosh Regalim and other periodic important days, to visit me in Yerushalayim, the Bet HaMikdash. Who asked you? I don't want you. You know something? Stop it. Stop bringing the wasteful incense offer, ketoret, which is the holiest offering and the most powerful vehicle that we have, commanded by God in the Bet HaMikdash. Stop bringing it. I call it to'eba, an abomination. These words make us shudder. Continuing, Chodesh v'Shabbat kiro mikra le'uchal avin va'asara. I don't want, and I'll get back to that term I mentioned at the end of the pasuk, I don't want your Rosh Chodesh, your Shabbat, your holidays. In fact, I've come to hate your holidays, your practice of holidays, and Asher Chodashim. It's a burden for me already. Hajeh in our terminology. And he says, you turn to me in prayer, but minan. But yes, I'm going to turn myself from you. You're going to pray further. You're going to abundantly supplicate and beckon me. I'm not going to listen. What is going on here? We're talking about observance. We're talking about Yirat Shamayim. We're talking about the service of God in Torah and Mizvot. This is what we're supposed to be doing, and yet it's being rejected by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Nabi. So who's being addressed in this haftarah? Well, there was no Reform and Conservative Jewry, in case you weren't aware, at the time of Yeshaya HaNavi. In fact, there were no other denominations of Judaism. Some emerged at the end of the second Beit HaMikdash. Well, there were people who did the right thing and people who didn't. There were wrong and evildoers. There were plenty who were engaged in paganism and idolatry, unfortunately, and other serious avonot. And then there were those who were observant. Obviously, he's not addressing those who are not observant in this chapter, because why would he say, I don't need your Shabbat and your sacrifices and your prayer if people weren't doing that? He's obviously addressing those who are already practicing these mitzvot and this observance of Torah and mitzvot and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And to those he's saying, I don't want it. He's observing what we would call an observant or a quote unquote religious Jew. In a Yiddish terminology, they might say someone who's from, right? Us, basically, the best of us. And he's rejecting all that we have to offer God, seemingly, the practices that we use to create the standard for someone who is an observant, religious, God-fearing Jew, so to speak. And he's rejecting it all and spitting it right back in our faces. Why? I told you I skipped around a bit, and there were some terminologies that I'm now going to return to, and there are points, and mainly two critical points that I would like to focus on, which we can glean from the rebuke and the messages, the harsh messages from Yeshaya HaNavi, and a theme that is focused on in Pesukim, which follow those that I mentioned. Well, the first point is a term in Pasuk Yud Bet, and that is Remos Haserai. You come to visit me on the periodic days. Who asked this of you? Remos Haserai. Those two words mean the trampling of my courtyard. So referring to the Hased Beit HaMikdash, the huge courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash, where not just Kohen and Levi, but Yisraelim, all, and even women, men and women, children were permitted to enter certain parts of it. When you came to, so to speak, visit the Beit HaMikdash, to bring your korbanot, you came to the Hased. Trampling of my courtyard. I don't want it. Who asked you? And there are a few implications of that phrase. One is simply insensitivity. You can picture someone who is going to buy some food for Shabbat or lulav and etrog for Sukkot, and he cuts the line, and he pushes and shoves his way through in order to get it. That person basically is missing a large point of the mitzvah, as he is sacrificing a ben adam lahadero, a proper mode of behavior between men and fellow men, for his ritual observance. And that is completely inappropriate. And we can reflect upon certain practices in the Beit HaMikdash, which were suspended because it was literally pushing and shoving and people hurting each other in order to do a mitzvah. It's not considered a mitzvah because we're not disengaged from society and in a very myopic way observing rituals to God. That's not a religion, that's a cult, call it a religion, but it's certainly not our observance of Torah and mitzvot. Rather, we're a whole movement where we integrate our interactions, ben adam l'havero, men, fellow man, of course, with our observances directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's one simple way of looking at that terminology, those who stampede through my courtyard. But a more powerful message, I would say, and more focused on by the commentators, is that when you use the term walking, trampling through an area, it's sort of in an unconscious manner, where one may do something out of rote and routine. You're bringing korbanot, you're observing Shabbat, you're praying, but you're doing it as one would just, stampede and, walk through in a very ignorant way, his schedule out of rote and routine without really paying attention to what he's doing. I don't want observance. I don't want physical ritual. I want your hearts and your mind engaged in every single practice of mitzvah that you observe, that I command you. The Hamarali Baba says the Zohar. I want your hearts and your minds, and the mitzvah is not worth much without it. So that's a very important message that Yeshayahu was giving to the, so to speak, observant and religious people and communities of Am Yisrael. But the essence of this rebuke of these seemingly Torah Mitzvot observant people comes in the continuation of this parasha, or this haftarah. And I'll read one pasuk and then I'll focus on one term. After all of the rejections that I read you, in pasuk Tet Zayin, or in Tet Yud Zayin, I'll read Yud Zayin, is the very poignant, direct message. Limdu Hetev, rather than all that, here's what I want from you. Limdu Hetev, Dirshu Mishpat, Ashiru Hamos, Shirtu Yatom V'Ribu Almana. Learn well to seek justice. Strengthen those who are the victims. Judge properly on behalf of the widow and the orphan. Opening a door of concept of Jewish life, of Torah and Mitzvot, and of much discussion among the prophets as the message being given to this crowd and this nation, and to us. And that is, you can't ritually observe me in Mitzvot and ignore the other half of Torah. And we see throughout the Nevi'im themes of justice, begging people and the Jewish nation to social responsibility, caring for the downtrodden, and conducting a just society with a justice system. And that is, you can say, throughout the prophets, the most popular theme of rebuke and direction and instruction and guidance by our Nebi'im, over and above everything else. Very rarely do you see discussion regarding Hilul Shabbat and Kashrut, what we relate to in terms of observant religion people. Rather, you see a lot of Avodah Zarah warnings, and you see a lot of this. A lot of demand for us as a society to be a just society. There's more, however, because this parasha, this speech, this monologue of Yeshaya really hones in on this message. And I'm going to focus on couple of words which you can find in Pasuk Yod in Pasuk Kaf Aleph. And this, Tel Hachamim, is a terminology only used in one other book. Echa hayta lezona kriya ne'emana. How has the faithful city become zona, wayward? Hachamim tell us that there are only 4 times the prophets prophesied with the term Echa. 3 of them are by Yirmiyah Hanabi in the book of Echa itself, beginning the chapters, the 1st, 2nd, and 4th chapter of Echa. And the 4th mention was really the first one, Yeshaya Hanabi in this pasuk. The word Echa is expressed by someone who is shocked, shell-shocked, can't believe what he's seeing, who relatively speaking is comparing what was to what is. And Yeshaya Hanabi is in absolute shock. He calls Yerushalayim, he calls the Jewish society, the Jewish people, our way of life that was, and the Torah standard Torah expectancy, ne'emana, trustworthy, one of integrity, one of honesty, a model for the world of a just society, of a compassionate and empathetic society, and an honest society. And Yeshaya peers down at what he sees and looks around at the reality on the ground. He says, Echa, how could it be? What have we become? How have we descended into a lack of ethical behavior and a lack of integrity and of immorality? And he speaks of in the following Pesukim, which follow, Kapet, Kaf Gimal, etc., that we deal dishonestly in our money manners, in our business. We take bribery. We are dishonest. We take advantage of others that are in a position of weakness. And he warns us, you need to change this behavior. And in it, he uses a term which is embedded in one of the berachot of Amidah 3 times a day on weekdays. Pasuk Kavav, he says, I need you to turn this thing around and act with integrity and ethical behavior. Va'ashiba shofetayich berishona v'yo'asayich kebetehila. And then I'll help you return your judges and your justice system as they were back in the day in earlier generations, and your leaders, your counselors, those who guide your asayich like they were in the beginning. Only then and then you'll earn the distinction yet again to be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city, the honest city. And this is the theme that reverberates throughout our prophets. And this is the primary focus of Yeshaya, the prophet, as he speaks to, addresses a nation, a society, communities that seem to be observant of the Bet HaMikdash and sacrifices and Shabbat and the holidays and prayers, and he rejects them. And he says, and this is the term that I didn't mention before that I want to focus on, before I want to now re-mention, and that is Lo Uchal Aven Va'asara. I can't take Aven, evil doing, evil thinking, Va'asara, which could mean holiday and celebration and gathering. I can't take hypocritical behavior. I can't take people who practice what seems to be on the external presentation practices of observance of religion and Torah and Mizvot. On the other hand, are thoroughly non-observant and non-religious people. Because you can't be two-faced. You can't have a dichotomy within your life as a faithful servant of God. We're a whole people. The Torah touches every part of our lives. We can't be a dishonest and unethical society. We can't deal with lack of integrity in our money and business dealings and our interactions with people, and then still think, when we go back to the Knis and the Bet HaMidrash and our shuls and our learning of Torah, and say, look at me, I'm religious, I'm observant. That's not a whole Jew. And here, Yeshaya says in a very direct way, it's not a Jew. It's not a Jew. I can't take that hypocrisy. I can't, and I won't. I need you to come back. I need you to bring back a sense of honesty and moral behavior into your society. And then the last pasuk, which punctuates our haftarah, in that famous prediction by our prophet Yeshaya, Sion b'mishpat tepadeh, v'shabeha b'zdaka. Do you want tepadeh? Do you want redemption? Do you want Yerushalayim to come back? Only with justice, a just society, and of course, social responsibility, which, by the way, Am Yisrael is pretty great at this day and age of taking care of the unfortunate and the disadvantageous people. But I need justice, and I need it now. I need honesty and integrity. You want Mashiach, You want redemption. That's the way your life has to look. That's the way our societies have to look. We have to be only one face. We have to be consistent. We have to be wholehearted. We have to embrace Torah in every aspect of life. That is the rebuke of Hazon Yeshaya, of our prophet, that precedes Tisha B'Av. Make no mistake about it. Our Mashiach, our days of redemption, our good days, cannot and will not come, says the prophet, unless those modes of behavior, unless that flaw in our Jewish society is fixed. And that is what we need to hear in every generation, and we do hear going into Tisha B'Av. We can't escape. We can't get around it. We point the finger at ourselves in every generation, and today in our society, in our community, in our families, at ourselves, and we ask, what can we do to change? And what can we do to bring back that great picture and paradigm of Yerushalayim Chadyan Emana, the faithful city? B'ezrat Hashem, it will return, and we will turn it around, and we will see our full Geulah Shelema and redemption. And this Tisha B'Av should be our last, and should be turned and reverted into a day of great happiness and celebration. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.